Imagine sitting down for a really tense, high-stakes game of chess.
Right, where you're agonizing over every single move.
Exactly. You are analyzing the board, trying to anticipate your opponent's strategy, doing all the normal things. But a few moves in, you slowly start to realize your opponent isn't actually trying to capture your king.
They aren't even playing chess at all.
No,
Yeah.
they're just waiting for the right moment to pour gasoline over the board and light a match. I mean, you literally can't win a game when the other side's only objective is burning down the room.
It completely shatters your understanding of the situation. You are no longer engaging in a competition. You are watching an existential threat unfold right in front of you.
Right.
And if you keep trying to play chess while the other guy is holding a match, you are going to lose everything.
And that profound disconnect, that's exactly where we find ourselves today. So welcome. We are doing a deep dive today into a really stark geopolitical analysis provided by Middle East expert and data entrepreneur Ken Van Ireland.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. Our mission today for this deep dive is to, strip away the daily news cycle for you. We want to look past the press conferences and the diplomatic hand-wringing to uncover the actual fundamental strategic realities of the escalating conflict in the Middle East.
Because the headlines miss so much of it.
They miss almost all of it. We're going to explore why Western powers are completely misreading the situation and why a narrow 21-mile-wide waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, is the ultimate apocalyptic flashpoint,
Right.
one that could trigger a structural collapse of the entire global economy.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it really is a sobering framework. When you look at the daily headlines, the focus is almost entirely on the political back and forth.
Oh, yeah, it's all about negotiations and proportional response.
Exactly, statecraft. But the core of Van Arlen's analysis argues that we aren't witnessing a traditional political dispute over borders or resources at all. We are witnessing an existential battle fueled by deeply opposing, just entirely irreconcilable worldviews.
So let's establish that foundation, because this disconnect in worldviews dictates literally everything else that follows.
Right.
Van Arlen's thesis basically argues that the West is, well, incredibly naive in how it approaches Iran. We treat them like a traditional adversary.
We assume there's a rational state actor at the wheel. Someone who wants a better economy, more trade, a seat at the geopolitical table.
Someone who actually responds to economic sanctions.
Right, but that projects Western political logic onto a regime that simply does not use it. The leadership in Tehran does not operate on a political mandate. The analysis points out they operate on a theocratic religious mandate.
Which is completely different.
Totally different. Their stated objective isn't to negotiate a better trade deal. It is a religious calling to destroy the West. And that roadmap is entirely explicit in the source material. It starts with the destruction of Israel, moves on to regional Christians in places like Lebanon and Syria, and then eventually targets Sunni Muslims.
Man, that fundamentally changes the math of diplomacy. I mean, you cannot negotiate a peace treaty with an ideology that literally requires your destruction to fulfill its ultimate purpose.
You can't. You really can't. And if you accept this premise, which is what the analysis is built on, you start to see the massive blind spots in Western diplomacy.
Especially when it comes to the nuclear issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. For years, Western leaders took immense comfort in the Ayatollah's fatwa.
The religious ruling.
Right, the ruling that supposedly forbade the development of nuclear weapons.
I remember when that fatwa was heavily cited all over the news. It was treated by so many as this huge diplomatic victory.
Like we finally had a breakthrough.
Yeah. People wanted to believe we finally had concrete proof that the regime wouldn't build a bomb, which meant, we could just manage the situation with sanctions and regular inspections.
We desperately wanted a piece of paper that confirmed our own biases.
Yeah.
But this analysis is completely uncompromising on that specific point. It frames the fatwa as pure deception. It's a recognized tactic, according to the source, to buy time and deflect pressure while the actual work just continues underground. It was, as the analysis bluntly puts it, just lying, and lying again.
Which brings up a truly terrifying implication for us. In the West, our entire understanding of nuclear weapons is built around that old Cold War concept of mutually assured destruction.
Oh, God.
Exactly, Mad D. We view them strictly as a deterrent. You build the bomb specifically so you never actually have to drop it.
That is the cornerstone of Western military philosophy. But the framework we're looking at today asserts that Iran wants the bomb to actively use it.
Because of the worldview.
Exactly. If your worldview is apocalyptic, a nuclear weapon isn't a deterrent at all. It is the ultimate tool to achieve your theological goals.
So if deterrence is just a fantasy because of that apocalyptic worldview, then traditional diplomacy is effectively dead,
It leaves military strategy as the only language left to speak.
which makes neutralizing this threat an unavoidable existential necessity for Israel and the United States. But as we transition into how this war is actually being fought, it's clear the U.S. and Israel are speaking two completely different dialects of that military language.
It is a fascinating contrast in doctrine. Let's look at the American approach first, because it's what most people are familiar with. When you examine the underlying mechanisms of U.S. power projection, it's fundamentally about brute force and just massive logistics.
Aircraft carrier strike groups, overwhelming aerial bombardments.
Sheer technological mass. The source describes it essentially as carpet bombing tactics. If the U.S. military identifies a critical target, their operational doctrine often leans toward flattening the entire neighborhood just to guarantee the threat is removed.
Which, I mean, makes sense given their history. The U.S. has spent a century fighting major global conflicts by overwhelming the enemy with mass production and heavy metal.
Right. But Israel cannot fight like that.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They don't have the geographic depth, the population size, or the sheer raw bulk of the American military. So instead of mass, they rely on highly surgical, data-driven warfare.
And that is where the intelligence apparatus, specifically the Mossad, becomes the central engine of their survival. They aren't just fighting a physical war.
They're fighting an information war.
Exactly. They have spent decades deeply infiltrating these hostile networks. They don't just figure out what city a hostile general is operating in. Through a mix of deep cyber infiltration and human intelligence, they map out the exact apartment building.
They know the exact floor he lives on.
Yes. As the analysis vividly describes it, they get to the point where they, quote, only have to ring the doorbell.
The visual analogies Ben Ireland uses here are incredibly sharp. The analysis compares the Iranian proxy network to an octopus.
Right.
And Israel's strategy isn't to try and kill the whole thing at once. It's methodically cutting off the tentacles one by one, or peeling an onion from the top down, layer by layer, removing command and control.
It requires immense patience and incredibly precise data. They are dismantling a massive, entrenched pyramid from the very top down, commander by commander.
So, to put it in perspective for you listening, the Americans will blow up the whole kitchen to stop a meal from being cooked, but the Israelis figure out how to drop a single hand grenade directly into the enemy's soup.
That is a perfect visualization. But what's really crucial to understand is that these two approaches, American mass and Israeli precision, they aren't operating in isolation.
No, they're deeply symbiotic.
There's this fascinating economic and technological feedback loop between the two. The U.S. spends roughly $40 billion a year on raw military hardware.
That's a massive budget.
Huge.
Yeah.
But Israeli software, artificial intelligence, and field testing refine those American weapons.
Let me make sure I'm getting the mechanics of this right. The U.S. basically builds a multi-million-dollar defense system based on simulations and, controlled tests in the desert.
Right.
But Israel actually plugs it into a live-fire, highly asymmetrical combat environment in the Middle East. They feed real-time intercept data back into the AI, tweak the targeting algorithms on the fly, and send that data back.
Exactly. They are essentially the live beta testers for American hardware.
Yeah.
Without Israeli tech and data refinement, those massive American systems wouldn't be nearly as effective in real-world combat.
They turn the blunt instrument into a scalpel.
And conversely, the U.S. couldn't develop that real-world refinement on its own without the active laboratory of the Middle East.
Okay, but I have to push back here, because this is where the strategy seems to hit a wall for me. Let's look at the actual end game. You have the U.S. bringing the heavy metal, and Israel executing these brilliant surgical assassinations of top commanders.
Right.
But you can't just assassinate your way to regime change. I mean, if the regime controls 90 million people and massive resources, cutting off a tentacle just means another one grows back. What does peeling the onion actually achieve long term?
It's a critical question. And the strategy here goes far beyond just eliminating individuals. The goal of precision striking these mid-level and high-level commanders is to systematically destroy the physical infrastructure of the Revolutionary Guard.
You mean breaking the actual mechanisms they use to hold power?
Yes. The regime doesn't hold power purely through popularity. I mean, they hold it through a vast network of control checkpoints, surveillance hubs, enforcement units, communications arrays.
So Israel's strategy is to pinpoint and destroy those specific control factors.
Exactly. Because beneath the theocracy, there is a large, highly educated, largely secular pro-Western Iranian population. But they are completely suppressed. The intelligence agencies believe that by removing the physical mechanisms of state control, they can create the breeding room for that population to rise up and overthrow the theocracy from within.
But banking on a civilian uprising feels like a massive, almost reckless gamble, doesn't it? You're talking about tearing down the fences and just crossing your fingers that the people inside decide to revolt.
It is a gamble.
How do you even time a military operation around a hypothetical revolution? You can't see human sentiment from a satellite.
You can't. And that intelligence blind spot is the most terrifying variable in this entire equation. Van Ireland introduces a brilliant mathematical metaphor to explain this exact problem. He calls it the lily in the pond.
Right, I wanted to get to this. Let's look at the math on this because it really clarifies things.
So imagine a pond with a single lily pad. This specific lily pad doubles in size every single day. The math dictates that after exactly 30 days, the entire pond will be completely covered.
Okay.
So the question is, on what day is the pond exactly half full?
Well, if it's full on day 30 and it doubles every day, it has to be half full on day 29, which means on day 28, it's only a quarter full.
And by day 25, it barely looks like anything is happening at all. The pond looks placid. The framework argues that civil uprisings work the exact same way.
Oh, wow.
The intelligence agencies simply do not know if they are currently on day 3 or day 28 of the Iranian uprising. The visible signs of a regime collapsing only become obvious at the very last second, right before the tipping point.
So you could be looking at a society that seems completely stable, completely under the regime's thumb, and tomorrow the entire structure tips over and the streets are flooded with protesters.
Exactly.
That means they are essentially flying blind regarding the timeline.
Which is why the strategy demands relentless, continuous pressure. You have to keep dismantling the regime's control structures, pushing their economy to the breaking point, and facilitating that environment until the lily suddenly blooms.
And to navigate that blindness, the Mossad heavily utilizes local minority groups.
Yes, groups like Kurds, Arabs, Sunnis. People who blend in, who speak the language, and who have deep historical grievances against the regime. They are the human sensors on the ground, trying to detect if we are on day 28.
It is a profound, slow-burn strategy of internal destabilization. But that brings us to the ultimate consequence. Because it's easy for you listening to look at a map, see this happening thousands of miles away, and think it doesn't matter to your daily life.
But it does.
It really does. If that lily doesn't bloom fast enough and the war boils over, the impact is going to land directly on your doorstep.
This is where the analysis shifts from a regional conflict to a genuine global catastrophe. If the internal pressure fails, or the regime feels it is about to fall and gets desperate, the ultimate geopolitical choke point comes into play.
The Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz,
The 21-mile-wide waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
through which a massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply must pass. The framework outlines an apocalyptic scenario where Iran, facing collapse or escalating war, simply mines and closes the strait.
And this is the scenario where American boots on the ground become absolutely unavoidable.
Yes. And to be clear, we aren't talking about a massive land invasion to conquer Tehran here. We're talking about a brutal, close-quarters naval and coastal fight.
The U.S. would have to send forces into heavily defended waters simply to clear the sea mines and silence the anti-ship batteries, just to let civilian tankers pass.
Because if they don't, the economic mechanism of collapse is almost instantaneous. Let's trace how this supply chain breaks. Day 1, the strait closes. Tankers cannot get insurance, so they stop sailing.
And the physical supply of global oil plummets.
Day 2, global energy markets completely panic. Prices don't just rise, they skyrocket by hundreds of %.
Which immediately triggers galloping structural global inflation.
The analysis highlights the devastating ripple effects on European industry in particular. Take the massive petrochemical complexes in Rotterdam or the heavy manufacturing and German auto industry.
Right.
These facilities run on continuous, highly energy-intensive processes. They operate on incredibly tight margins. If their energy costs triple overnight, they literally can't afford to keep the machines running.
They don't just pause, they shut down completely. Workers are laid off. The cost of transporting basic groceries spikes. We're talking about a severe global recession that wipes out livelihoods in a matter of weeks.
And this leads to a really stark, uncomfortable contrast in societal resilience.
Hmm.
And again, just to be clear, we are reporting on the source material's viewpoint here, not taking a political stance.
Of course, we are just unpacking Van Ireland's framework.
Right, because when you are facing an apocalyptic economic and military scenario, the ultimate question is, who can actually withstand the pain?
And the analysis doesn't pull any punches when comparing the different societies.
No, it doesn't. It notes that Israel is operating on a total war footing. They have 440,000 reservists, everyday citizens, teachers, tech workers, who are willing to fight and absorb massive societal disruption.
Because they understand this is a literal fight for their physical survival.
Exactly. On the other side, the Iranian population has historically proven a staggering capacity to endure suffering. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, they sustained massive casualties, faced chemical weapons, and simply kept fighting.
So both of those societies have a proven capacity to absorb deep existential pain. But then the analysis turns its lens on the West.
And it describes the West as dangerously unprepared for the harsh realities of geopolitical survival. The framework uses the term decadent.
That's a strong word.
It is. It argues that Europe, for example, has made itself incredibly brittle through what it calls climate illusions.
Let's unpack the mechanism there, because it's not just a political critique in the source, it's presented as a structural vulnerability.
Precisely. In the effort to transition their energy grids, many European nations decommissioned stable baseload power sources like nuclear plants, while outsourcing their actual energy security to complex external supply chains. They built state-of-the-art economies, but effectively handed the keys to the generator over to volatile regions.
Yeah.
They lacked the domestic buffer to absorb a massive geopolitical shock.
So if the pain gets that bad, if inflation is destroying the middle class, factories are closing, and American soldiers are taking casualties trying to clear a waterway, it forces a critical question.
Will the U.S. hold the line?
Exactly. Won't the domestic pressure in the U.S. force a future administration to just back down? Won't they just cut a deal with Iran to make the pain stop and get the oil flowing again?
The geopolitical math in this analysis provides a firm, undeniable conclusion. No, the U.S. cannot back down.
Why not?
Because if they capitulate, this is no longer about oil prices. It is about raw global power architecture. The United States must win control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Because if they lose that fight, or if they compromise under pressure, the Gulf states would instantly realize the American security umbrella is a myth.
Exactly. The Arab world would pivot immediately to whoever can protect their interests, likely China or Russia. And once that alignment shifts, the entire foundation of American global hegemony collapses. It is a zero-sum game. The U.S. has to go in full force, and they have to win, regardless of how much domestic pain it causes.
Man. To synthesize the sheer scale of what we're talking about today, this isn't just a distant territorial dispute over borders. We are looking at a clash of fundamental survival.
Absolutely.
You have the combination of Israeli precision intelligence peeling the onion, locating the exact pressure points of a regime, partnered with the blunt, overwhelming mass of the American military.
And they are locked in a race against a theocratic regime that views its own survival and the destruction of its enemies as a religious mandate.
It is the ultimate collision of an unstoppable force and an immovable object, with the global economy quite literally held hostage in the middle of it.
Which brings us to one final, deeply provocative thought for you to mull over. We've spent this time talking about the catastrophic fallout if the U.S. loses control of the region, but Van Ireland's framework draws a haunting historical parallel about what happens if the U.S. actually wins.
Wait, what happens if they win?
Think about it. Suppose the U.S. completely secures the region, neutralizes the threat, and perhaps even oversees a regime change in Iran.
Okay.
The United States would then effectively control the main energy tap to the rest of the world, and who desperately, absolutely relies on that specific oil to keep their economy alive.
China.
China. The analysis points out a terrifying historical precedent. Prior to World War II, the United States imposed heavy sanctions and effectively cut off Japan's oil supply in an attempt to curb their regional expansion.
And Japan, looking at their reserves dwindling and feeling they had absolutely no other choice for national survival, was essentially forced into launching a direct attack on the U.S.,
dragging everyone into a global war.
Right.
So the haunting question this framework leaves us with is this. In the effort to secure the Middle East and maintain its own global dominance, could the United States accidentally squeeze China's energy supply so tightly that it forces China into launching a global war for the exact same reasons Japan did?
Are we trying to put out a fire in the stadium only to realize the extinguisher is full of gasoline? That is heavy.
It really forces you to question every assumption you have when you glance at the headlines.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the rules of the game because, as we've learned today, not everyone is playing the same sport. Keep learning, and we'll see you next time.